need to understand something most men never really grasp, even after years of dating, relationships, and disappointment. Validation is not kindness. It feels like kindness. It looks like kindness. But biologically, psychologically, it's leverage. And once you see it clearly, you can't unsee it. A woman's brain is wired to respond to validation at a chemical level. Every compliment, every sign of approval, every message that tells her you're valued triggers a dopamine release. This isn't poetic language. It's neuroscience. Dopamine is the same chemical involved in addiction, motivation, and craving. Validation doesn't just make her feel good. It creates anticipation, desire, a pull. Here's where most men go wrong. They think more validation equals more attraction, so they compliment constantly. They reassure endlessly. They praise everything. Her looks, her choices, her emotions, her presence. They believe approval will bring closeness, but biology doesn't work that way. Like any stimulant, validation loses power the moment it becomes predictable. At first, it hits hard. She lights up. She leans in. She feels seen. But the brain adapts fast. Tolerance builds. What once felt exciting becomes normal. What once stood out fades into the background. The same compliment that once made her smile now barely registers. And the man delivering it? He becomes invisible. This is the paradox most men never learn. Constant approval does not bond her to you. It neutralizes you. When validation is always available, it has no value. Scarcity gives meaning. Overexposure kills it. The men who understand this don't chase validation as a way to earn affection. They calibrate it. They don't flood. They dose. They understand that desire doesn't grow from certainty. It grows from contrast. When validation is withheld at the right moments, something subtle happens in her mind. Her attention shifts. She moves from receiving to seeking. Not because you're playing games, not because you're being cold, but because uncertainty activates the nervous system in a way predictability never can. Her brain enters search mode. She starts wondering what changed. She replays interactions. She questions her own position. And suddenly, the dynamic reverses. You're no longer trying to get her attention. She's trying to regain yours. Think of validation like a bank account. Most men overfund it. Compliment after compliment, reassurance after reassurance, hoping for affection in return. They deposit constantly, expecting emotional interest as interest earned. That's a fatal mistake. The high-value man doesn't dump validation like spare change. He manages it like capital. He lets the balance rise and fall. Enough to keep engagement alive, never enough to create emotional safety. This is where the 70-30 principle comes in. 70% of the time, you're present. You're warm. You're attentive. You offer genuine approval and connection. But 30% of the time, you withdraw. You return to your own world, not to punish, not to manipulate, but because your life does not orbit around her availability. You are not there to be consumed. And here's where precision matters. Validation only works when it's specific and earned. You look incredible tonight, lands, because it's moment-based and intentional. You always look good doesn't create desire. It creates noise. Generic praise blends in with every other man she's met. Specific validation cuts through because it feels rare, intentional, chosen. It signals that your approval is not automatic. Even more important, surface-level compliments don't hit the core. Every man praises appearance. That's expected. That's baseline. It barely moves her. What does move her is validation that affirms identity. Praise her mind when she says something sharp. Praise her originality when she creates something meaningful. Praise her strength when she chooses discipline over comfort. These forms of validation don't just feel good. They anchor into self-image. They hit deeper layers of the psyche. And because they're rare, they linger. This isn't new knowledge. Long before psychology had language for it, Machiavelli understood the principle. Power is not about giving everything. Power is about giving selectively, about controlling access, about understanding human response. Validation is leverage. Spend it like an investor, not like a gambler throwing his last coin into the dark. But understand this clearly. There is a thin line between mystery and emotional neglect. Too much distance, and she grows cold. Too much attention, and she loses interest. The mastery is not in extremes. It's in rhythm. You feed, but you never fill. You let her feel your presence, but she never owns it. You don't disappear to provoke anxiety. You don't overstay to create comfort. You move in and out of connection with intention. This isn't cruelty. It's clarity. Most men never reach this level of awareness. They keep chasing approval, thinking effort equals attraction. They keep explaining, reassuring, proving, and they never understand why desire fades. If this feels uncomfortable, that's a good sign. It means something clicked. Because once you see validation for what it really is, you stop wasting it. You stop begging for closeness with praise. You stop turning attraction into obligation. You become selective, and that's where the shift begins. But validation is only the first emotional gap, and it's not even the most dangerous one. The second gap is far more powerful, far more misunderstood, and far more destructive when misused. It's connected to something every woman says she wants. And it's the very thing that kills attraction the moment she receives it. Stay sharp. Let's move deeper because this is where most men lose control without even realizing it. Emotional gap number 2 is uncertainty. And this one is lethal to attraction when misunderstood. Here's the trap. Women often say they want security, consistency, clarity, and reassurance. Men hear that and think, good, I'll give her exactly that. They respond instantly. They explain everything. They make their intentions obvious. They plan far ahead. They remove every question mark from the dynamic, and then she pulls away. Not slowly, not subtly, sometimes overnight. The man is left confused, replaying conversations, wondering what changed. He did what she asked for. He gave safety, he gave certainty, he gave stability. And yet, desire vanished. That's because what she asks for and what her nervous system responds to are not the same thing. Her biology is not wired for full certainty. It's wired for tension, for anticipation, for the unknown, for moments she cannot predict and people she cannot fully control. Security, when handed freely, does not soothe her. It numbs her. Predictability dulls hunger. Total availability removes gravity. When everything is known, nothing pulls. You've seen this before. The man who replies instantly every time. The one who always adjusts his schedule. The one who explains every thought, every plan, every emotion. The one who maps out the future too early and leaves nothing unspoken. She doesn't feel safe. She feels nothing. This is the hard truth. Total clarity is the death of seduction. There's a psychological principle behind this called the Zeigarnik effect. The human mind fixates on what is unfinished, on open loops, on unanswered questions, on stories without endings. The unresolved creates tension, and tension creates attention. Women are not immune to this. In fact, they're often more sensitive to it. When she can read you completely, when she knows what you'll say before you say it, when your behavior is fully predictable, her mind goes quiet. and a quiet mind is a bored one. The most attractive men don't explain everything. They don't narrate their lives. They don't overshare. They live. They move. They reveal selectively. Their lives are not open books. They are encrypted chapters. You don't hand her the entire story. You make her chase the plot. This is where the 70-30 principle shows up again. 70% of you is visible, present, real, grounded. She knows your values, your direction, your standards. But 30% remains in shadow. Not lies, not games, not deception. Space. When she asks about your past, you don't dump your entire history. You give fragments, enough to intrigue, not enough to satisfy. Her imagination fills in the rest. When she asks about your future, you share the vision, not the map. Direction, not logistics. Power is not in what you show. Power is in what you withhold. Machiavelli understood this perfectly. A prince who reveals every intention loses his throne before the war begins. Transparency without restraint invites vulnerability. Mystery preserves leverage. A man who can be fully decoded becomes irrelevant. But understand this clearly. Mystery is not a tactic. It's a consequence. You cannot fake it on it. If you're fabricating stories, engineering drama, or intentionally being vague to provoke reactions, you're not mysterious. You're insecure. And women can feel that immediately. True mystery comes from motion. The man she can't solve isn't pretending. He's building. He's occupied. He has a mission that doesn't require her validation or supervision. He's unavailable for inspection because he's engaged with something bigger than the moment. She asks, "What did you do today?" You don't give a play-by-play. You say, "I had a meeting that might change a few things." And then you move on. No explanation, no follow-up, no justification. Now her mind ignites. What meeting? What things? What's changing? You didn't create tension by teasing. You created it by not over-explaining. This is not a game. This is biology. You give tension, not trivia. You share direction, not route. You speak in edges, not outlines. She is not reading your diary. She is decoding a presence. But here's the critical warning. Mystery without substance collapses fast. Silence must carry weight. Absence must imply purpose. If there's nothing behind the shadow, uncertainty becomes irritation, not attraction. That's why this gap has a time limit. You have about 90 days, not to impress her, but to prove that your silence leads somewhere, that the unknown connects to momentum, that your restraint is backed by progress. If you fail, mystery turns into annoyance. If you succeed, it becomes obsession. Because now something powerful happens. She starts thinking about you when you're not there. She replays conversations. She rereads messages. She remembers moments that didn't fully resolve. She fills in blanks with imagination. Her mind starts working for you. She searches for you in quiet moments, in pauses, in empty space. That's the reversal. She is no longer the one being pursued. She becomes the one who seeks. You don't chase. You don't explain. You don't plead. You remain the unanswered question that lingers, and you never had to raise your voice. But don't misunderstand this. Uncertainty does not mean emotional distance. It means emotional discipline. You're not withholding affection to punish. You're not disappearing to provoke anxiety. You're maintaining internal structure. You have a life that continues regardless of her reactions. That's the core of this gap. The unknown is only attractive when it's anchored to direction. If your life is chaotic, inconsistent, or stagnant, uncertainty feels unsafe. But when your life has trajectory, restraint feels magnetic. This is why men who are deeply focused on their purpose naturally generate attraction without effort. They don't need to manufacture mystery. Their priorities create it. They are present, but not clingy. Engaged, but not consumed. Warm, but not transparent. And this balance does something subtle but profound. It signals that you are not seeking her to complete you. You are inviting her to join something already in motion. That's the difference. Uncertainty keeps desire alive because it preserves potential, the possibility of discovery, the thrill of pursuit. But remember this, the unknown must always lead somewhere real. Otherwise, she walks. And when she walks, it won't be dramatic. It will be quiet, sudden, final. That's why this gap demands precision. Used correctly, uncertainty keeps attraction breathing. Used poorly, it kills trust. Mastery is knowing the difference. And now that you understand uncertainty, we move into the third emotional gap. This one doesn't operate in her mind alone. It activates something ancient, something instinctive, something she will never admit out loud. And when triggered correctly, it turns passive interest into burning obsession. Now we reach the third emotional gap. This is the one most men sense but never fully understand. The one that feels uncomfortable to talk about because it exposes something ancient, instinctive, and deeply denied. Female competition. This gap doesn't work because of logic. It works because of biology. And when it activates, attraction doesn't just grow, it ignites. Here's the truth most men avoid. Nothing amplifies a woman's desire faster than seeing other women desire you. She will rarely say this out loud. In fact, she may consciously deny it, but her nervous system doesn't lie. The moment she perceives that other women value you, your status in her mind shifts. You are no longer evaluated in isolation. You are evaluated through competition. One glance from another woman, one laugh that isn't hers, one moment where your attention isn't exclusively locked on her, and something flips. Suddenly, you're not just a man. You're a prize. This isn't romance. It's pre-language instinct. For thousands of years, female survival was tied to choosing men who were already validated by others. Nature does not reward the unchosen. It rewards the man who is wanted. This instinct didn't disappear with modern dating. It just learned to wear polite language. When other women want you, her brain draws a conclusion without asking permission. There must be something valuable here. And once that conclusion forms, attraction accelerates. The man who was just a friend becomes interesting. The man who felt familiar becomes dangerous. The man she felt neutral about suddenly occupies mental space. This is not jealousy, it's valuation. Her nervous system registers status through competition. Scarcity increases perceived worth. Availability lowers it. Machiavelli understood this principle long before psychology named it. A prince with only one alliance is weak. A prince courted by many holds leverage. The same rule applies here. A man with no options is vulnerable. A man with options commands respect. But here's where most men get it wrong. They try to manufacture competition. They flirt deliberately to provoke jealousy. They name-drop women. They post staged photos. They exaggerate attention. They try to make her feel threatened. That's amateur work. And it backfires. Forced competition creates anxiety, not desire. It signals insecurity, not abundance. The moment she senses you are trying to trigger something, your value collapses. Real competition is never announced. It's observed. The men who activate this gap naturally don't chase attention. They attract it. Their presence draws people in because their life has motion, direction, and weight. In social settings, they don't work the room. The room works toward them. Women feel safe around them, comfortable, curious. They ask questions. They linger. They laugh without effort. Not because the man is performing, but because he's grounded. And she watches. She doesn't just watch what you say. She watches how others respond to you, how women relax around you, how attention flows toward you without demand. And that information rewrites her internal hierarchy. You don't brag. You don't posture. You let the environment speak. You're polite, never crude. Engaging, never overeager. Warm, but contained. You're not seeking approval. You're allowing interaction. And then comes the critical moment. She realizes something quietly. You chose her, not because you had no alternatives, but because, out of many options, she stood out. That difference changes everything. When she senses that your attention is not guaranteed, when she feels she could lose you, a chemical shift occurs. Her nervous system moves from comfort to pursuit. She starts investing. Not because you demanded it, not because you asked, but because attraction, once triggered, seeks security through effort. Retention is not requested. It's triggered. But this gap is dangerous. Push it too far, and it destroys what it builds. If you make her feel like she's constantly competing, constantly trying to earn your gaze, you don't create desire. You create anxiety. She becomes defensive, suspicious, emotionally unstable. You stop being a mystery. You become a threat. On the other side, if you collapse into availability, if you become predictable, always accessible, always focused on her, competition disappears. The instinct shuts down. Interest fades. She stops imagining you with other women. And when that stops, valuation drops. Balance is everything. She should feel just enough competition to know you're desired, but enough safety to know she's chosen. This is not emotional manipulation. It's positioning. And positioning comes from how you live, not what you say. You don't provoke jealousy. You don't withhold to punish. You keep moving forward. You build. You grow. You maintain a life that generates attention without chasing it. That alone forces her to recognize something uncomfortable but compelling. You could be anywhere, and yet, you're here. Now imagine this scenario. You're at a social gathering. Another woman approaches you, asks a question, makes conversation. You don't freeze to prove loyalty. You don't flirt to provoke reaction. You respond calmly, naturally, like a man who knows who he is and doesn't need to manage perceptions. Accessible, but not eager. Charismatic, but not performative. She is watching. Not for words, for energy. She observes how easily you move through the room, how others respond, how relaxed the interaction feels. And that observation alone reshapes her attraction. Because now she's not evaluating you based on her emotions alone. She's evaluating you through social proof. Later, she opens up, shares something personal. Stress, doubt, vulnerability. You listen, but you do not become her therapist. You do not absorb her emotions. You do not abandon your center to make her feel safe. You hear her without losing yourself. Because the moment she senses that you are no longer centered, you stop being her anchor and start becoming her outlet. And outlets are used. Anchors are valued. You are not a free emotional service. You are a man with presence, with direction, with boundaries. You choose when and how to give your energy. That choice alone reinforces competition without ever naming it. Because she feels it. She senses that your attention is intentional, not guaranteed, that others could have it, and that you chose her anyway. That's the sweet spot. This gap, when mastered, does not create chaos. It creates gravity. She doesn't chase you because she's insecure. She invests because she values what could be lost. But never forget this: competition only works when your life is genuinely full. If you have nothing going on, no direction, no social world, no momentum, competition feels hollow. Women can feel the absence immediately. The instinct responds to abundance, not performance. That's why the men who trigger this gap most powerfully are not trying to attract women. They're building something meaningful. Their life pulls people in, and women respond to the pull. This is the third emotional gap. Validation creates craving. Uncertainty sustains desire. Competition ignites obsession. But even obsession collapses without stability. Which brings us to the fourth emotional gap. The one that determines whether attraction turns into attachment or burns itself out. Emotional leadership. And this is where most men fail, not because they lack effort, but because they misunderstand what strength actually is. This is where everything changes. The fourth emotional gap is not about attraction. It's about attachment. It's the point where interest either stabilizes into something deep or collapses under pressure. And this is where most men fail, not because they are weak, but because they misunderstand what strength actually looks like. Emotional leadership. Women do not need a savior. They do not need a fixer. They do not need a man who panics every time they feel something intensely. They need a center, someone solid, someone calm, someone whose internal state does not collapse when hers fluctuates. This is not emotional distance. It's emotional stability. Machiavelli understood this long before modern psychology. Power is not control over others. Power is control over self. The man who remains composed while others unravel commands authority without force. Women respond to that man instinctively, because her storms are not requests for rescue. They are tests, not of solutions, but of structure. Most men misunderstand this moment completely. She comes home frustrated, overwhelmed, emotional. He rushes in with answers, advice, fixes, reassurance. He mirrors her stress. He tries to calm her by absorbing her chaos. And the moment he does that, attraction erodes. Not because he's uncaring, but because he lost his center. When she spirals and you spiral with her, there is no anchor. Two unstable emotional states do not create safety. They amplify instability. Leadership is not loud. It is quiet control. It is the man who listens without being shaken, who hears her frustration without trying to neutralize it, who stays grounded while emotions move around him. When she speaks, you don't interrupt with solutions. You don't minimize. You don't rush to prove competence. You say, "That sounds frustrating. Tell me more." Not to comfort, not to impress, but to demonstrate that her emotions do not destabilize you. This creates something rare, a space where she can feel without managing your reaction, a space where she can be vulnerable without worrying that she's weakening you. Women do not forget men who can hold that space, because most men can't. They either detach completely, which feels cold, or they overengage, which feels needy. Emotional leadership lives between those extremes. You are present without being consumed. You care without collapsing. You remain steady, and steadiness is magnetic. This is not being passive. This is being immovable. If you cannot regulate yourself, you cannot anchor her. And if you cannot anchor her, you are not her man. You are just another emotional weight she has to carry. Think about it this way. Her emotions are like waves. They rise, they crash, they recede. Your job is not to stop the ocean. Your job is to be the shoreline, firm, unmoving, reliable. When she senses that, something shifts. She relaxes into you, not because you solved her problem, but because you didn't become part of it. That's leadership. But emotional leadership doesn't stop at listening. It extends into decision-making, boundaries, and direction. A leader does not ask permission for his standards. He sets them. He doesn't argue his boundaries. He enforces them calmly. He doesn't chase emotional approval. He maintains internal order. This is why emotional leadership often feels paradoxical. You are deeply attentive, yet not reactive. Caring, yet not compliant. Supportive, yet unmovable. And this balance creates trust at a visceral level. She feels safe because you are not fragile. She feels drawn because you are not dependent. She feels anchored because your presence is stable. Most men think leadership means dominance, control, authority. They try to lead by directing her behavior. That's not leadership. That's insecurity wearing confidence. True emotional leadership is invisible. It's felt, not announced. You don't say, "I've got this." She feels that you do. You don't need to calm her down. Your calm does it automatically. But here's the mistake many men make once they understand this gap. They become emotionally rigid. They shut down. They mistake control for suppression, and that kills connection. Leadership does not mean emotional absence. It means emotional regulation. You still feel. You still empathize. You still connect. You simply do not lose yourself inside her emotional experience. Because the moment you do, polarity collapses. She no longer feels led. She feels responsible, and responsibility kills attraction. Women do not want to manage a man's emotional state. They want to trust it. That's the difference. Now here's where this gap becomes even more powerful. When she feels emotionally anchored by you, she begins to open deeper layers of herself. Not performative vulnerability, real vulnerability, fears, insecurities, contradictions, unresolved wounds. This is not an invitation to fix. It's a test of containment. Can you hold complexity without judgment? Can you remain grounded while she exposes imperfection? Can you see her fully without reacting? If you can, something rare happens. She stops guarding, because she senses that you are not fragile enough to be harmed by her truth. That's when attachment forms. But emotional leadership alone is not enough, because not all women respond to the same emotional gaps in the same way. Some are driven primarily by validation, some by uncertainty, some by competition, and some by the presence of emotional leadership. Which brings us to the fifth and final emotional gap. The one that separates men who understand psychology from men who understand her. Psychological personalization. This is where precision replaces formulas, and where most men are eliminated, not because they lack effort, but because they apply the same strategy to every woman. And that never works, because attraction is not universal. It's individual. And the man who understands her specific emotional architecture becomes irreplaceable. This is the final gap. And it's the one that separates men who memorize tactics from men who understand people. Psychological personalization. Most men fail here not because they lack effort, intelligence, or confidence, but because they treat women like categories instead of individuals. They learn a rule, apply it universally, and then wonder why it works with one woman and fails completely with another. That approach will never get you mastery, because attraction is not built on formulas. It's built on perception. The fifth emotional gap is not something you do. It's something you see. You stop leading with charm. You stop leading with performance. You lead with awareness. Not all women are driven by the same emotional pressures. Some crave validation more than anything. Others are pulled by uncertainty. Some are deeply sensitive to competition. Others respond most strongly to emotional leadership. Your job is not to guess. Your job is to observe. Every woman reveals her dominant emotional gap through her behavior, not her words. Watch carefully. If she constantly asks how she looks, seeks reassurance, needs approval before making decisions, checks your reactions frequently, her dominant gap is validation. Her nervous system is wired to seek confirmation. In this case, you don't flood her with praise. You manage it with precision. You offer validation intentionally, not constantly. You let her feel seen without becoming her supplier. Compliments become meaningful because they are not guaranteed. If she becomes frustrated when you don't reply quickly, asks detailed questions about your plans, your past, your intentions, needs clarity to feel calm, her dominant gap is uncertainty. Here, you maintain the 30% shadow. You don't vanish, but you don't over-explain. You provide direction without disclosure, stability without predictability. If she brings up other women often, asks about your exes, gets jealous without evidence, monitors your attention, her dominant gap is competition. In this case, you never reassure excessively. You let her feel chosen, but never fully secure. You don't provoke jealousy. You simply live a life that reflects options. This is not manipulation. This is calibration. And calibration requires discipline. Boys apply one strategy to every woman. Men read the room. Every woman has a psychological fingerprint, a unique emotional architecture shaped by experience, attachment patterns, wounds, and reinforcement history. She may never articulate it clearly, but she acts from it consistently. Your advantage is not knowing psychology. Your advantage is recognizing which psychology you're dealing with. This is where the ethical edge matters. You are not exploiting these gaps. You are understanding them. Her need for validation often comes from early experiences of conditional approval. You don't shame her for it. You don't drown her in reassurance either. You help her feel seen without becoming her emotional crutch. Her need for certainty may come from broken promises, instability, or abandonment. You don't weaponize ambiguity. You give her structure without sacrificing mystery. Her sensitivity to competition may come from insecurity or fear of loss. You don't torment her with it. You let her feel selected, not threatened. These gaps are not flaws. They are pressure points of human design. And when you understand them, you lead without force, not by control, by comprehension. Now here's the shift most men never make. They think personalization means changing who they are. It doesn't. It means adjusting how you express who you are. Your values stay fixed. Your standards stay fixed. Your direction stays fixed. Well, what changes is where you apply pressure and where you remove it. That's mastery. And when a woman feels truly personalized, not flattered, not impressed, but understood, something deeper than attraction forms. She feels recognized at a level she cannot explain. You're not reacting to her behavior, you're anticipating her psychology, and that creates a unique bond. Because now you are not just another man. You are the man who gets her. But here's the final warning. These emotional gaps, validation, uncertainty, competition, emotional leadership, personalization, are dangerous in the hands of a man without a center. If you don't have internal stability, she will feel it immediately. If you don't have direction, mystery feels hollow. If you don't have discipline, competition becomes cruelty. If you don't have emotional regulation, leadership collapses. Power without principle burns fast. This is why most men cannot sustain attraction even when they trigger it. They borrow techniques without building structure. They mimic outcomes without understanding foundations. Women sense that inconsistency instantly, and they leave. You want real power? Then earn it. Build it. Live it. Do not study her psychology while ignoring your own, because the man who understands her better than she understands herself must first master the battlefield inside his own head. Let's recap the 5 emotional gaps clearly. Validation, the chemical addiction. The approval she craves, but only respects when it's scarce. Uncertainty, the paradox she responds to. The unknown that keeps desire alive. Competition, the instinct she hides. The ancient signal of value through choice. Emotional leadership, the anchor she searches for. The calm center that stabilizes chaos. Psychological personalization, the code only the elite decode. The ability to read her specific emotional architecture. These are unfair advantages, but only to the man who deserves them. Here's the challenge. Pick one gap. Not all 5. 1. Master it for 7 days. Not halfway. Completely. Observe how she shifts, how her energy changes, how the dynamic bends without you raising your voice, demanding anything, or explaining yourself. The men she follows are not louder. They are quieter, more aware, more grounded, and more disciplined. If you understood this, you are no longer average. You are no longer reacting. You are reading. And once you can read the room, the person, the psychology, you stop chasing outcomes. You create gravity. That is what makes a man dangerous. And this is only the beginning. Everything you've learned comes down to one simple truth most men avoid. Attraction is not something you chase. It's something you generate. The moment you stop trying to secure outcomes, things begin to shift. When you stop over-explaining, curiosity grows. When you stop flooding validation, it gains value. When you stop reacting emotionally, your presence starts to carry weight. This isn't about tricks or control. It's about alignment. A man with a center doesn't negotiate his worth. He doesn't rush to be understood. He doesn't panic when attention pulls away. His life is already in motion, and others feel that momentum when they step into his space. That's why the most influential men are rarely loud. They don't convince. They don't chase. They don't compete for attention. They let gravity do the work. When you master these emotional gaps, relationships stop feeling like effort. They stop feeling like strategy. They become responsive. People lean in because your energy is structured, intentional, and scarce. But here's the responsibility that comes with this awareness. Power without discipline collapses. Awareness without integrity turns hollow. These principles are not meant to exploit. They're meant to sharpen perception yours first. Because the man who understands psychology without mastering himself will always be exposed. So take this forward the right way. Pick one gap. Practice it consciously for 7 days. Observe instead of forcing. Adjust instead of performing. Watch how dynamics change when you stop chasing reactions and start embodying direction. That's when you realize something quietly unsettling. You were never meant to pursue attraction. You were meant to become the man it naturally orbits.